9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello, and welcome to what feels to me like America's oldest podcast. I know it's not the oldest, but we've been doing this for a long, everybody has a podcast today, but when we started like almost 10 years ago, no one had a podcast. But we're still here. We're still at it. We're going to keep doing it till we get it right. I'm David Rothkopf, and I'm joined, as happened for a long time, by the eternally youthful Ed Luce of the Financial Times. How are you, Ed?
I'm feeling very old, but thank you. Delighted to be on.
And likewise, Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you, Rosa?
Forever young, David.
Forever young. And the bubbly and effervescent Dr. Kori Schake of AEI. How are you doing, Kori?
I am exceedingly well. And unlike Ed and Rosa, since you know, David, I live in the 18th and 19th centuries, I too am feeling incredibly old.
Yeah, well, you'd like this globe. This globe behind me is from 1800.
Okay, I once won a dinner party game where the placemats were maps of from different time periods, and you had to guess what year the map was made by what the countries were represented on it.
David, I sincerely hope you're not using an 18th century globe to derive all your current information about current geopolitics.
I will tell you something. A little known fact, Ed knows this, you guys don't really know it, but I collect maps. So I have many, I have 40 or 50 maps on the walls here, that most of them are from the 16th and 17th century. So this globe is actually the newest thing I have here. And I specialize.
Portugal is a great power on all of your maps.
On all of my maps, there's a line through the middle of Brazil with a Portuguese flag on one side and a Spanish flag on the other side. No, I collect my specialty. I'm sure the audience is really interested, but what I really focus on are maps that have a big mistake on them. The classic example is, and Kori, you will like this because it's the most classic, is California as an island, right? Which is on so many maps as an island.
Mm-hmm. I do love that one.
Whose maps?
Pardon me?
Whose maps? Who's responsible?
Almost all maps of the sort of 17th century or the early part, because people would go up the Sea of Cortez and they assumed it just kept on going.
Yeah, makes sense.
Also, Sir Francis Drake's map of California omits the San Francisco Bay because it was so fogged in when he came up the coast, he didn't realize there was an inlet at the bay.
Yeah, which is and Donald Trump has the same view of San Francisco to this day. Although I have a Venetian map of California from 1600 or so that shows there was a long legend that there was a Chinese village in what is now Oregon. That the Chinese had somehow settled a village, and it sort of says Chinese colony on it in Italian.
Oh no! Next thing you know, the irredentist claims of the People's Republic of China are going to come for Oregon.
Yeah, they'll be like, we're here. We're back. Anyway, so well, we'll see. We'll someday we'll do a guided tour of the maps. Anyway, let's. There's a lot going on, and this episode will be a little bit of a potpourri, and you guys can drive it wherever you want. But I think the most self-serving thing we can do here is start with Ed's column today.
I'm delighted. I'm honored. For me, one trepidation.
Well, don't have any trepidation. Talk about the thesis, because I've just noticed something, Ed. I know you've just finished this giant book on Brzezinski, so that's one of your obsessions. And I know that you're, writing about America in the time of an election. That's another one. But you really, really hate Elon Musk these days. I don't know what it is, but you and Elon, you've got a real problem. Is there something in your past that you want to talk about? By the way, I agree with you 100%, but I do note that Elon's really gotten under your skin.
You're right. And it's partly not personal, but partly visceral. I mean, he's always been under my skin because I think he's a bad actor. But in July, when you had the racist attacks in Britain on the refugee hostels with disinformation, quite overt disinformation, pointing mobs of, violent racists towards refugee hostels in places like near Manchester and near where 3 young girls had been murdered at a Taylor Swift party. And the false allegation was that it was a refugee asylum seeker, essentially, who'd killed them. And it turned out it wasn't. It was a British citizen who killed them. But all these far-right nuts who'd been removed from Twitter before Musk took it over had been restored, much like Alex Jones and, all the usual sort of suspects had been restored over here. He had restored British neo-Nazis onto that site, one of whom, Toby Robinson, was a purveyor of this false information. But as was the algorithm amplified and disseminated lethally false information. And Musk himself said this can only end in civil war, meaning multiculturalism. It wasn't about asylum seekers, whether one was guilty of murder or not, in this case not. It was about multiculturalism. And so I put this out, that democracies cannot tolerate this kind of disinformation from the owner of the largest, at least political social media platform in the world. And he responded to me. And it's therefore my most viewed tweet in history. It got something like 60 million impressions. But
wow.
Wow.
Why do you even bother writing books when you could get 60 million impressions on a tweet?
If I can monetize the hate.
Monetize that tweet.
If I can monetize the sewage that came in the wake of what Musk said, which was bollocks, then, I would be a wealthy man. I wouldn't be quite as wealthy as Musk, but I mean, it was an extraordinary experience. But I mean, that wasn't the sort of origin of my suspicion of this figure. I do think as I wrote in Economy, very kindly cited David, I do think he's the Henry Ford of our times. Henry Ford, of course, being a far-right ideologue, America First sympathizer, anti-Semite, and the richest, or one of the richest men in America then in the 1930s. And Musk is even richer, the richest man in the world. And he is saying things like, if Trump doesn't win, this will be the last election. I mean, this is sort of weapons-grade disinformation from a guy who has a vested tax-related interest in Trump winning and does not care about this country that he proclaims to care for. And so, I don't know, there are a lot of nasty people around, but when you're that rich and you're prepared to burn everything down to get richer, it does something to me.
As it should. And it's a great column, and that's why I brought it up. Rosa, I know that you took a wrong turn at one point and studied in England for a while. Do you use the term bollocks? And you say,
whenever I can, I search out opportunities to say bollocks.
Yeah, I want to call this podcast "What Musk Said Was Bollocks," but we kind of live in the golden age of bollocks, and I don't mean it in the literal sense, but you've got Musk out.
A very long time without that visual, David.
Nice. It's been a long time since we've heard you say that. I'm getting a little misty-eyed.
David, you should have a Golden Bollocks Award.
The DSR Golden Bollocks Award.
And what would that look like, Ed?
Don't answer.
I'll hand it over to Kori.
Oh, now Kori is gonna have nightmares. Anyway, but Rosa, what I was getting at was, it's not just Musk, although he controls this giant bollocks machine. But I mean, here we had hurricane, and not only is Trump and so on, Vance, been spreading lies, but the Russians are spreading lies. The Russian disinformation machine has decided it's in their interest to amplify lies about the federal response to the hurricane, and so on. And so I wonder if there has ever been a moment in history where it was more challenging for the average person to figure out what was true or not.
It's actually a really good question, and it's one I puzzle over quite a lot, because on the one hand, social media is different. The speed with which disinformation can spread is just astonishing. It can spread in mere minutes, and go global in mere minutes. I think Elon Musk, as a super empowered individual, has outsized power, but we're also in an era in which some random weirdo, either because they're just insane or because they're a tool of the Russians or whatever, can start some rumor that is completely false, and it can go viral owing to the nature of the outcome.
Well, look, if Ed Luce can put a tweet out that 60 million people...
60 million impressions, right? Yeah. So on the one hand, there's so much that feels like this is different. This is just really, really different than any moment before in human history, in terms of both the simultaneous ability of super empowered individuals to have an outsized influence, but also the simultaneous democratization of disinformation and information effects, and the speed and globalization of information flows feels different. But at the same time, I keep coming back to things like, just take the Nazis. It turns out you can pretty successfully and really quite astonishingly quickly get a whole lot of people to believe absolute falsehoods, and inspire them to be complicit, actively or passively, in genocide. And you can do this pretty quickly, and you can do this in a low-tech way, with radios and newspapers, or take the Rwandan genocide, right, where the power of radio spread genocidal messages, and you had, in terms of sort of slaughter per time unit, rivals the Holocaust in the sort of the level of killing and atrocities as a result of misinformation and disinformation that was spread by much older technologies. So on the one hand, everything feels totally different. On the other hand, we humanity have plenty of experience of disinformation being weaponized to lead to horrific both political violence and crimes against humanity and widespread atrocities without these new technologies. So I don't have an answer to your question, David. This is something I actually struggle with a lot. How much difference do the different technologies actually make? Or are they in fact making us imagine that something has changed when in fact we're just seeing there's more continuity than change? And should we be more focused on sort of the psychological vulnerability to certain kinds of disinformation? And is our focus on the technologies misplaced or not? I don't know the answer. I would be really curious to see what the rest of you think about.
Well, I'm sure, and I would like to get Kori's reaction. I'm sure that your first reaction, Kori, is to go, well, actually, in 1511, they believed in spontaneous generation of mice and rats from rags, and that this was one of the causes of the plague. There was also widespread belief that Jews were poisoning the wells, which I can tell you authoritatively we were not, and also that cats were the familiars of witches, and so on. So there's always been disinformation, right? That's Rosa's point, isn't?
So
is that do you believe
David,
that?
If you're going to steal my answer, what do you leave for me?
Well, I don't know.
Before I answer that great general question, though, I want to say one other thing about Elon Musk's partisan and racist and anti-Semitic behavior, which is that he is a major Department of Defense contractor, both for SpaceX and for Starlink. And he went on Tucker Carlson's show joking about assassinating a presidential candidate. At a very minimum, that is behavior unseemly for somebody who is being paid with taxpayer dollars. But, it's probably more than that. And so it's not funny. It's genuinely dangerous. And even though I understand that one of the major reasons for American success is we tolerate crazy people who are also brilliant at something, in the way he is brilliant at Starlink and he's brilliant at SpaceX. But it is genuinely problematic to have somebody who's receiving a bunch of American government funds to be behaving in so politicized and so dangerous and such an incitement of violence kind of way. So, to your point about spontaneous generation of mice and rats from rags causing the flame, you are, of course, exactly right, David. It is not newly a problem that people are gullible, uneducated, easy to persuade. That is basically the history of the Shockey family. And the new technology only makes it easier and faster. It's not a fundamental change. I mean, there are serious historians who argue one of the major reasons for the American Revolution was the shocking rate of literacy and the ability to start up crazy pamphlets that you pass from hand to hand among British colonists in North America. The telegraph, the radio, the TV, these have all made it possible for politicized disinformation. And my own sense is that the scale and speed of this kind of disinformation and the way that America's enemies are capitalizing on the openness of free societies in order to propagate chaotic messages that turn us against each other is something we're not going to be able to solve by technology, but there are reasonable limits. I mean, social media platforms having a fiduciary responsibility or a legal responsibility to police dangerous messages on their platforms seems to me not an extreme infringement on our liberty in order to preserve public safety.
Well, Ed, that's one of Elon Musk's issues of the week, because he came out earlier this week and was talking about how the efforts of the Biden administration to filter out of some social media sites disinformation about COVID during COVID was an infringement on free speech. And one of the whole sort of problems, with the arguments of the right is that essentially what they're saying is free speech includes everything. Free speech includes the right to yell fire in a crowded theater, which of course the Supreme Court at least used to not agree with. Well, we'll see. We'll see whether they change.
Is it true that the court said you can't yell fire? I hear from time to time that this is not true.
Well, that line itself is what we call dicta, meaning it's just it's a piece of rhetoric in a Supreme Court opinion. But yes, absolutely, the Supreme Court has historically held that the First Amendment does not mean that the government cannot restrict time, place, and manner of speech. That some of the things that you take into consideration in determining the justifiability of restrictions on speech have to do with, are they going, is this speech that is going to cause, immediate danger of some sort? And that's the context in which the idea of, you don't have a right to shout fire in a crowded theater, that free speech rights, and that there's no right that is absolute. All rights are subject to some limitations because they are potentially in conflict with one another. That one person's right to free speech and liberty and life is or to use a different piece of Supreme Court dicta, your right to move your fist stops an inch in front of my nose. And that you balance these. So historically, of course, we don't just say anybody gets to say anything they feel like saying at any point in time. I think that right now we are at a real crisis moment for ideas of free speech because it's under assault from both the left and the right in very different ways. On the right, the argument has been I should get to make up whatever dangerous, malign falsehoods I want to make up. And even if they run the very predictable likelihood that they will cause immediate harm, that's fine. And the use of money is a form of speech and so on. We saw that reflected in the Citizens United case from the Supreme Court some years back, which has really upended how politics work in this country. So on the right, we have an assault on free speech that's coming from that direction. From the left, we have an assault on free speech, which is sort of partly in response to that, which is saying, free speech is a cudgel wielded by the powerful to protect their prerogatives. Free speech is just something the powerful say when they want to be racist or they want to say whatever thing is damaging to some group of people who are more marginalized and oppressed, and we should actually be able to suppress damaging speech. So on the left, if anything, the argument has been there should be more suppression of speech if it's damaging. And on both sides, I think that sort of traditional, to whatever extent there was a kind of a consensus in this country on the parameters of the right to free speech, that consensus has completely eroded, with those on the left arguing essentially that there should be no absolute right to free speech, that the sole measure of what speech should be permissible should be my idea of what is damaging and bad. And on the right, the argument has been, no, I just get to say whatever I feel like saying.
It seems to me, Ed, that the big risk in a society that seeks to be an open society, and thus is going to get a certain amount of, noise in with facts in its discourse, is that it not be a gullible society. The gullibility of a society impacts the damage that can be done by abuse of free speech. And yet it seems that, there is a movement afoot here, but also in other parts of the world to weaken educational standards, the kind of things that help us to sort of train the gullibility out of people, at least attempt to. Do you think the trend lines are going in a worrisome direction here? Or is this just a political move because there's always a political group that is seeking to take advantage of the less educated?
I think the trend lines are going in the wrong direction. I just want to add something to what Kori mentioned about Elon Musk's comments about, jokes about assassinating a presidential candidate on Tucker Carlson, and the fact that SpaceX has and Starlink have public contracts with the Pentagon. Palantir, which is Peter Thiel's company. Palantir is like a major defense industrial contractor. I mean, it's like it's enmeshed. It's braided with a lot of Pentagon systems, including advanced sort of AI warfare stuff. It's the most difficult company in America to cover, to get information on. It is the definition of a deep state company. So the ironies here of those who are arguing strongest for speech and against the deep state being incredible profiteers off Washington and off the federal government. The irony here should never be understated. This has really got to be pressed, investigated, lights shone on it. But your question about the speech thing, I mean, let me answer partly by picking up on Rosa's very sort of elegant summary of the directions that the debate's been going on the left and on the right, and on the Supreme Court's history of this. So, Elon Musk says it doesn't matter, what I do with my algorithm. It might prioritize hate in your view. It does. It might encourage, incite, violence and actual offline deaths. It's a private club, and I have the First Amendment, and that's that. And any attempt to infringe on that is tyranny. That's essentially what he says, not just, to Tucker Carlson, but on Twitter 20 times a day. He is pushing a variation of that argument. And what's so useful, about Rosa's summary is that historically, even America, with the most absolutist defense of free speech in the First Amendment, second to none in any political system and legal system around the world, even America has contextual limits on speech if it leads to actual harm and an imminent danger. And I doubt any conservative jurist is unaware of that. But things have got so polarized, we're now being pushed into really cartoonish corners on this question. Musk. Sorry.
You froze up there, or were frozen by Peter Thiel or something.
Right after you said you doubt any conservative jurist is unaware of that.
I doubt any conservative jurist is unaware of that, but we've been pushed now into such sort of cartoonish positions. Musk, of course, being in one corner, and the left, I think going in a very self-defeating direction about the essentially seeing speech as limited by trigger warnings. That it would take a real skill I don't have, to present this as a positive trend line.
What a perfect moment for Ed to have frozen.
Perfect moment for the sinister powers that be to destroy your ability to comment on this.
We're not doing this. I just want everybody to know we're not censoring Ed. He's just dropping out of his conversation. Let me turn to Kori on this. And again, and I said it'd be kind of potpourri at the beginning, but it's a related story. So yesterday, and this, I'm not asking this in a political sense. I'm asking this in a national security sense. Yesterday, we started to learn of a Bob Woodward book that said that the former president of the United States, after his coup attempt, after everything that had happened during the first term, apparently, got on the phone to Vladimir Putin 7 times. We also learned, by the way, that he sent Vladimir Putin some sort of advanced COVID testing equipment at the height of the COVID epidemic, when you couldn't get it here. But let's set that aside. That's pretty despicable. But right now, Trump is running for president, and Russian disinformation is a big part of his campaign. And it seems to me, it's, for some reason, people, I guess, have heard this too much. They've been Russia to death. I don't know. It seems to me worrisome that the ex-president was on the phone to Putin when he wasn't president, while he was sitting on a big trove of stolen national secrets in his house. And now he's running for president, and the FBI and every intelligence organization says the Russians are actively trying to get him elected. What's your reaction to all this?
Yeah, I think you're right, David, that because we have been hearing so much about Russian influence over Trump and the people around him. Remember Mike Flynn lasting, 3 weeks as national security advisor? And Jared Kushner's private diplomacy. So one line of serious concern is the amount of Russian influence over Trump personally and the people around him. And that's clear, right? I mean, in the Woodward accounts, it sounds like Vladimir Putin tells Trump, don't let anybody know about this. And it's evidently the only secret Trump has ever been able to keep. And so clearly doing the Russian president's bidding. is one line of problem. A second line of problem is for candidates for high office to be engaged in international diplomacy is problematic, right? There should be one American foreign policy, and it should be run by the sitting president. And other politicians vying for the job, it's a really bad thing for them to be engaged in free association diplomacy. I think both of those are worrying. I am myself just continually shocked at the number of Republicans who are apologists for Trump's relationship and support for Vladimir Putin, when Putin's behavior, his authoritarian behavior, his violence against Russian citizens, his violence against Ukraine with the invasion and conduct of the war crimes, the behavior in Syria. I'm just so astonished that my fellow Republicans are finding ways to contort themselves and dismiss it.
Yeah. What's your reaction to these revelations, Rosa?
I mean, nothing is surprising anymore. I mean, this is not surprising. Of course, Trump was doing all these things, right? I mean, it's completely consistent with all of his past behavior. And I still share Kori's shock. Youthful as I feel, I am old enough to remember when Republicans thought the Ruskies were kind of the bad guys. And when Republicans thought that it was kind of important to shield U.S. national security secrets from the Russians. So I still just find it absolutely stunning that we now apparently live in a world in which it's fine. It's all fine. Nothing to see here. What's the big deal? The former president of the United States is in secret communication with the president of an adversary nation, at a time that he's in possession of all this classified information and while he's simultaneously here in the United States trying to discredit U.S. responses to COVID, he's simultaneously handing off scarce resources to the Russian president. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is insane. I don't even know what to say about it. There's nothing interesting to say about this anymore, except that it remains stunning to me that this is apparently the world that we now inhabit. A part of me, an optimistic part of me, thinks that most Americans actually would not think this is cool. The challenge, including many Trump voters, would not think this is cool. That the challenge, and this goes back to our earlier discussion about what is and what is not truly meaningfully different about the social media environment that we now live in. I think one of the things that does feel different is that the sort of total absence of any sense of shared authorities. Which makes it harder and harder to break through to people. So it's not just that they're only getting information from one source, it's that they're really primed to believe that information that comes from any other source must not be true, which takes me back to what I was sort of suggesting a little bit earlier. I think that the fundamental challenge is of how do we get out of this mess. It's not really about information and getting information to people. It's sort of about how do you restore some sense of shared identity and shared trust, because the challenge right now is it's not that there is no accurate information that is available to people. It's that breaking through to both get that information to them from sources who matter, who they trust, so it doesn't just get instantly dismissed as, oh, well, that's just more propaganda, or that's just more fake news, or, well, they would say that, or, that's the challenge.
Yeah, well, it's, if the atmosphere around you is filled with lies, it devalues the truth. Disinformation devalues information because it's hard to tell them apart. Ed, we've just got a couple minutes left here, and I said it would be a potpourri. And, part of what Kori's talking about is is Republicans defending Trump's love of Russia, and there is a certain dysfunctionality at the core of the MAGA GOP. Today, we've been getting news out of the UK about the dysfunctionality of the right in the UK, which seems absolutely dedicated to becoming an irrelevant political organization. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Well, they're having a leadership contest for the next leader of the Conservative Party, down to the last three, I think, two of whom are hard right, one of whom, James Cleverly, would be a perfectly reasonable choice given the context.
Yeah, but I think they ruled him out today.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize he's out. So who are we down to? Jenricks and Badenoch. Oh my God.
That's correct, Kori, right? Isn't that what happened?
Okay, that's okay. Sorry, I'm late to that particular news. I've been focusing on what's happening over here. Well, that's bad news. I mean, it just takes the Conservative Party further into an extremism that is just damaging for democracy. It becomes more like what the Republican Party has become, which is cultish and dangerous. But because I hadn't realized that news, maybe I'm not qualified to update you. I was still in the vein of hoping Cleverly would be the winner. And he is a decent person. I have to say, on the Trump calling Putin 7 times, we sure this wasn't like his biannual, his 6-monthly career employee performance report. I mean, this is it sort of fits. It's been 3.5 years. That's about 7 calls.
Yeah,
well played.
I agree with you. Kori, you were nodding when I said Cleverly was out, and I noticed earlier in this battle that there was one person you had flagged for me a long time ago, Tom Tugendhat, or I don't know.
Tugendhat's great.
And he was great, and he was like the first person they ruled out. And so I was, but I remember you had said he was great, and all of a sudden they seem to be heading towards the people who everybody thinks are intolerable. And do you have a view on that?
Well, it's in keeping with my ardent belief that the Republican Party can be dragged back to principled conservatism.
It can be.
It can and must be. But
Yeah, well,
I do sometimes feel like the last of the Mohicans.
yeah, well, there are a few other Mohicans out there, but they're not a lot of Mohicans. I certainly hope that they have a big resurgence out there. Personally, I got to tell you something. I watched Liz Cheney standing next to Kamala Harris in Wisconsin, and I had tears in my. I thought it was incredibly moving that she was standing up and delivering that message. So it gave me a little hope that you're right.
Can I ask a question? What are the chances that either George Bush or Mitt Romney do the same? Too low?
I think George Bush.
I think
very
Romney
low.
has actually ruled it out, saying he thinks he will have more influence in restoring the Republican Party if he does not endorse Harris. And I don't think former President Bush, has said anything on the topic.
I think he's said something, not that he will have more influence, but that he's essentially said, I'm not going to endorse anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when the stakes are this high, you would think you might reconsider that. But for another day, there are 27 days to go in the U.S. election. So we will have a couple more weeks in which we can discuss these things, plus all the October surprises. And if you're anything like me, you depend on these weekly visits with Kori and Rosa and Ed to get your sanity restored, or at least your bearings restored. So thank you, guys. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll be back again every day with more here at the DSR Network. Bye-bye.